Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew. I am Dawn Zoldai, one of your co-hosts.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co host. We've got a great lineup today of awesome articles. We're going to be talking about drone inspections on offshore energy facilities. We're going to be talking about automating shipping on a global scale. We're also going to be moving from sea to land and talking about automated trucking in Germany. And then finally, we're going to end with a feel-good story about a veteran gaining the ability to walk again. So stay tuned to hear that. We've got some great guests to talk about these topics. We've got Sean Guerre and Anna Petrig, Dr. Anna Petrig. And, actually, let's just let them introduce themselves. So, Sean, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thank you. I appreciate being here. And I am the managing director of Innovate Energy, which covers emerging technology as it impacts the energy markets in all areas, such as drones, robotics, automation, virtual reality, and immersive tech, including digital twins. And look forward to continuing to help the industry connect globally.
Awesome. And we also have Dr. Anna Petrig. Anna?
Hi everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Anna. I'm a professor of international law in Basel, Switzerland. We are a landlocked country, but still I'm dealing with law of the sea, mainly maritime security issues, and in the past couple of years also dealing a lot with autonomous ships. And I'm notably involved in the International Maritime Organization's work on elaborating rules on autonomous shipping, and I'm very happy to discuss some of these issues with you today.
Awesome. And I'd like to remind our viewers, if you're interested in anything you see and you want to make sure you don't miss the next episode, please hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons on YouTube. They've really helped this channel grow already, and we're really excited to see you again. And as a reminder, you can participate in the chat on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, wherever you're viewing this right now, and please feel free to ask our guests questions as we go. Our first article is from Sean, and I think I know this writer. So, high and deep, drones impact offshore energy. Sean, would you like to tell us why you chose this article?
Sure, absolutely. And it is written by Don Zoldi. And the thing I liked about it is the fact that we're covering a tremendous amount of ground when we get to offshore energy. So what I mean by that is the article covers all the different aspects: aerial, surface, subsurface. It covers not just fossil, but also the up and coming areas in renewables, such as solar and wind, and there's a lot of activity going on. So I felt like the article was really, shaped nicely to cover all those different areas of technology and how they're being applied in the offshore market. Also, I felt like it would nicely possibly be a good tie-in to Anna's article when she starts talking more about some of the legal aspects with IMO and surface autonomous vehicles. So I felt like that was just kind of a great tie-in both ways. But what's amazing to me is how fast the offshore market has developed when you consider that, just a few years ago, the onshore market was where the primary use of drones and robotics was taking place. And the offshore market has developed now very rapidly. And especially, I guess, the aspect of that is, from the dirty, dull, dangerous, that it fits all of those areas. So it makes a lot of sense that you would use robotics, but also the environments are so harsh. So the ability to use surface vehicles or subsurface or aerial in some of these areas around the world, kind of amazing, the technology that's required in order to be able to do that. The endurance of the drones, the payloads they have to be able to carry, things along those lines. So those were the areas that really kind of drew me to the article and made it most interesting for me to talk about today.
Anna, what's your take?
I guess it's a really interesting article because it demonstrates how fast this technology evolves and for what tasks you can use it. And I was really struck by the fact that this technology develops very fast. And from a legal perspective, this is a bit of a problem because law in general lags behind technology, but innovation cycles become shorter and shorter, and technology moving faster and faster. So this really accelerates the pacing problem. And as a lawyer, you just ask yourself, how can law keep pace with all these developments? Because of course we have a lot of rules on shipping, and but are these little systems really ships? Maybe not. So we have something like the Internet of Things at sea, Ocean of Things, and the question really is, do all these rules apply, or do we need new rules, or does it suffice to reinterpret the legal framework? So huge challenges from a legal perspective.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And by the way, fun fact, I met Dr. Petrig through an incredible Navy JAG, judge advocate. I was an Air Force JAG. Commander Tracy Reynolds was one of our speakers on the law of air, land, and sea at our first Law Tech Connect event at AUVSI Exponential this year, and introduced me to Anna. And I'm pleased to announce that Anna will be on our faculty next year in Denver at AUVSI Exponential. So we are absolutely having a maritime panel. Sean, I'll defer to you to talk about EDRC and our plugin there, but clearly, huge maritime energy plugin as well. But I couldn't agree more with both Sean and Anna. I wrote this article for Inside Unmanned Systems magazine and really was inspired by Sean's, let's just call it Keystone, or premier event that they do every year, the EDRC's Summit, which is in Houston, Texas, and will be in I think the week of June 12th next year. Just incredible, the panels and the information and the technologies that we saw. And I was inspired by that to write this piece. I reached out to Richard Fisher, the publisher for Inside Unmanned, and I said, hey, there's some incredible things happening here. I want to write about this. And so I met Andrew Lawrence of Deep Trekker, doing some of the remotely operated vehicle undersea inspections and saving, as Sean said, the dirty, dangerous, dull jobs. You don't need divers now. How expensive and dangerous it is to employ a diver for undersea inspections of these millions of miles of pipelines. So that's a huge development. And of course, Volatus Aerospace was there with their really cool Avidrone. That's like the picture that you see at the top of the article. They're doing this ship to shore middle mile drone delivery. Again, saving time, saving money, not having to use a helicopter, not having to use a surface boat or some other kind of vehicle to do these deliveries of smaller things, probably like tools and things like that. But both in the land, on the sea, and under the sea, as well as in the air, the legal paradigms are not clear. I'd say almost it's ironically a little bit more clear in the air, because we have, to Anna's point, the FAA decided to kind of go a different direction, create a new rule, Part 107, as most of us know here, for the drones. And lots of exemptions and plugging and playing some of their other Code of Federal Regulations provisions, but lots of question marks in the law of the sea. And we'll talk about this more with Anna's article next. But Mike, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, generally, I'm excited about the advancement of drone technology, specifically in the energy sector, looking at the kind of lineage of that evolution from basically a point where no company even wanted to mention that they were using drones, if they were, because they thought it was a competitive advantage, to now it being understood as a technology that we're all using, and then now advancing to basically every facet, nook and cranny of the energy sector. I think the reason for that evolution is probably because of the dangerous work that was involved for human inspection to go on, and the also critical need for that level of inspection to happen. So not only are you getting rid of the dangerous aspects, but you're also allowing the ability to scale. And to push this one step further, it's not just capturing the data. We now have the tools to consume that data with machine learning to actually surface what the critical issues are, and then have a human review it for flagging. So I think all of this is just a great step in the right direction for the technology, specifically on a commercial plane, because there's a lot of money in energy. And it's probably one of the most critical issues is, maintaining our energy sector, as we've seen, especially in the state of global politics as they are now. Energy consumption, energy production is more critical than it was before because it's not really one world economy. It's now split in the energy sector back into two worlds. So I don't think drones are going away on that front. I think they'll only become more critical as we scale up over the next couple of years.
Maybe an aspect which we didn't touch upon yet is we only talked about beneficial uses of drones, but of course drones also give a cutting edge to criminals. And for instance, in the Red Sea, drone boats have been used to attack critical infrastructure at sea, attacks against oil platforms, also against merchant ships and warships. And for criminals, this means that you can act from your home office. You don't have to be at the scene of crime, which greatly reduces your risks of being killed, arrested, or even detected. And I guess that's also going to be a challenge. Of course, drones can be used, or remotely piloted crafts underwater, above water, for beneficial uses to enhance law enforcement capabilities, but it can also enhance the risks at sea, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, we did discuss kind of on our Twitter Spaces last week with Sean Pribble, the nature of automated systems in a maritime setting are now kind of making definitions kind of strange. Is this a ship? Is it a vessel? And it's easy to imagine, as we see in all sorts of theaters, whether it's war or even prisons, drones being used for nefarious purposes because they do provide almost a level of removal from the threat actor from getting caught. So again, this also got brought up the kind of last week on the Full Crew, the use of kinetic solutions to dismantle drones. And that makes sense on a battlefield, but kinetic solutions are not readily available to private industry and probably shouldn't. So at least in their current form, right? So we're going to have to work this out not only on a legal and regulatory level, but then what do you do when somebody breaks that law, period? They don't care. They're breaking it on purpose. What do you do with that person, and what technologies need to be developed to kind of deal with that person too?
I think that's a great segue to Anna's article because, words matter, terminology matters, whether it's a good actor or a nefarious actor. There's legal implications to what we're calling these mass autonomous surface ships in particular, which is not a settled area. So I don't know if we want to roll to that next one.
Yeah, so why did you want to bring up this particular article, Anna?
So this article is about the efforts of the International Maritime Organization to regulate autonomous ships. The IMO, that's the specialized agency of the United Nations for shipping. And 5 years ago, autonomous ships was simply a non-issue in that organization. And within only 5 years, the regulation of mass turned into the main regulatory project of the IMO. And that's because autonomous ships is no longer, a vision of the future, but it's already a reality. They're increasingly reports about successful trials. I just read that there has been a 10,000 kilometer voyage, fully autonomous, by a cargo ship. And for instance, Japan announced to have half of its cargo ship autonomous by 2040. So there is an imminent need for regulation. And why is there a need? Because if there is just one truism in the law of the sea for the last thousands of years, it's that a ship has an onboard crew, and with autonomous ships, for the first time, you have ships without crew on board. And with this, essentially, the assumption on which the entire law of the sea is built is kind of no longer fulfilled. And this also holds true for maritime security, which I'm mainly interested in. The assumption has been that offenders would be on board ships, enforcers would meet suspect at sea, they would board a suspect ship, they would exchange physical documents to prove nationality of the ship, they would interrogate suspects, etc. So there would be human interaction, physical documentation, but with autonomous ships, you simply don't have an offender at sea. Offenders may act from dry land. Autonomous ships may no longer have certificates on board, but function with e-certificates. So everything changes from how you handle cargo ships, who is a seafarers, up to maritime security issues in how do you board an autonomous ship, and does it make sense to board an autonomous ship if there is no person on board. And so the IMO started to regulate these ships, and just last week there has been a meeting by a working group discussing terminology which is basic but essential, such as what is a master? If the master is no longer on board, can a remote operator be a master? Traditionally all function has been incumbent on one single person, the master. He was in charge of everything. Is that also the case with remotely piloted or fully autonomous ships, or can that role be split? And if so, who would be the interlocutory for enforcers, etc.? All of these issues have to be discussed and are currently discussed. And this article is also interesting from a regulatory perspective, because it's true that new technologies have always been the driver for new roles within IMO, but autonomous ships are somehow peculiar because it's a technology which is still in development. So for regulators, it's kind of difficult to grasp what they should regulate, because the end product is not yet there. And it's also difficult to understand when one should regulate these ships, because if you regulate them too early, you risk to lock in the technology through your regulation. And if you don't regulate, you risk to hamper innovation, because investment is only done if you're certain that your product will be lawful. And so there's a bit of a paradox. You should wait and hurry at the same time. And so the IMO has chosen a non-binding instrument, which is much more flexible than hard treaty law, which is a very rigid and slow process. So the IMO has chosen a soft law approach, which allows to integrate, to make first regulatory experience and then to integrate all that experience in a binding code, which will only be issued at a later stage. So it's both from a substance point of view, but also from a regulatory approach view, very interesting what's going on within IMO.
Yeah, so actually, before we go to Sean's response to that, we've got a question from the chat. Mason Jar M. If there's no crew, what steps would be taken to protect the cargo or vessels from potential hijackers?
That's a great question.
Yeah, so like you've seen people can, even on a less kind of consequential, arena or vector, you've seen people actually just tamper or play around with automated vehicles. We actually brought that up too, where you'll purposely step in so they can't go forward. So it would make sense that if the cargo is valuable, why wouldn't I just board the ship if I'm not expecting anybody to be combative. So
Exactly. And also, in case of boarding an autonomous ship by an enforcement team, there's also the risk that, the ship just sails away together with the boarding team, so that they also get hijacked. That was expressed by a commander, and I thought, yes, true. So you have entirely new scenarios which were not neither regulated nor like in operations. You didn't face them so far, and of course you could also hijack a ship by cyber means, so deviate cargo. You would maybe not even have to go on board, but you could just use cyber means to hijack it. So yes, entirely new scenarios, lots of challenges for existing law.
Cut the link home and redirect the ship back to your shore.
You can absolutely do that. I mean, actually, there's documentation that Russia, in the Black Sea, there was an exercise going on, some U.S. forces and partner forces, and, the Russians spoofed some of the PNT signals, right? Position, navigation, timing, GPS. And all the people on the ships thought it looked like they were parked at an airport on land. So, I mean, how hard would it be to hack into one of these systems and, like you said, Mike, just redirect it to your port, to your little area where you can then offload this precious cargo and, just take over the ship. So, a whole different level of piracy, I think, will come about because of this.
And fun fact, after that incident you just described, they reintroduced in some curricula navigation by using traditional means, because you saw that GPS is maybe not always the most reliable tool to navigate.
Yeah, people whipping out the maps, right? Like, like Pirates of the Caribbean, they're sitting in the captain's area, like with the maps. Yeah.
Yeah, too mutable. Digital data can be manipulated. So, Sean, what's your take on this?
Well, off of that, I mean, obviously you have the cybersecurity issue, which allows you to hack, and then you cross back into the legal aspects, right? You have different jurisdictions. So I could just take it to where my jurisdiction's most favorable. So, unlike, right now where a pirate has to, board where it is, I can move that thing anywhere I want. So I think that's interesting. The other thing I think is interesting looking at this as this becomes adopted at a higher level, we're looking at this as well at different offshore energy facilities. I'm curious to see what the transition is going to look like when we move to an actual ship that is not made at all for humans to be on it, or crew, because right now what we're doing is we're automating a lot of what already exists, and it's being retrofitted or changed over. So I think it's going to be interesting to look at how these facilities are built, so where they would never have a crew. So then how does that aspect relate back to, once again, if you had to put a boarding party on there or had to put a crew, how is that going to work if it's built for that not to ever occur, for it to be maximized for automation? So I'm intrigued to see how that's going to play out as well.
Yeah,
I would love to jump in here, Mike, if you don't mind, and then, close it out. I think it's also going to be a great segue to your next article, because we're talking about some trucks that were configured with absolutely not to have a driver, right? What Sean just said. So, I think, the key is going to be, how the IMO and how others view this, because like I just said, the FAA decided we're going to create a whole new rule, because I see a lot of parallels here, Anna, to aviation, where, of course, those preeminent safety concepts like see and avoid, right? Giving right of way to other aircraft, which, of course, you have a similar thing in the law of the sea. Once drones were created and there was no pilot on board, they really had to step back and say, can these rules still apply? And I think what they found was, it was a blessing and a curse to do Part 107, because it was a whole new rule, but then having to adopt some of these other, like Part 135 for example, commercial deliveries with drones, and how tortured that has been. So, I think there are a lot of parallels and lessons to be learned in the sea community by looking at what is happening in aviation and seeing, hey, what worked, what worked well, what could we do better or different than what they did. I think that would be a really interesting discussion. I don't know if those kinds of thoughts have crept in, or if everybody in those rooms, Anna, are like, so locked into the law of the sea and that background that they don't maybe have the aviation people at the table. Because and also, as Sean mentioned when we first started, these systems are going to be multimodal. At the end of the day, like, there's going to be things launching from these ships in the air. There's going to be things underwater. There's going to be absolutely a ground connection. When you get to port, a robot's going to come and offload the cargo. I have no doubt about all of this. And I think having all the right voices at the table would be useful.
Absolutely. I guess right now there's a little bit of a silo discussion, like the maritime lawyers, the law of the sea lawyers, the aviation lawyers, they just discuss amongst each other. And I guess it would be very wise to have more like cross-cutting discussions and discussing transversal issues instead of just areas of the law. But yeah, the IMO, that's a specialized agency. You mainly have people from transportation offices from their respective jurisdictions. So, people need to be highly specialized, but that also prevents crossing into other fields. So there are pros and cons if people get highly specialized too.
Yeah, hopefully sometimes we'll be able to bring people together. Like, I know I'm excited, next June we're going to be doing the energy version of Law Tech Connect, and that exact thing of cross sector is what we're hoping to do. We're hoping to have both the maritime, the subsea, the aerial, everyone who's involved in legal aspects as it pertains to automation and robotics. So I think, at least from a sector perspective, we're hoping to be able to cross some of those boundaries, because I think it's absolutely right, Don. People are going to be talking about this and have a need for these cross jurisdictions to be able to work together.
If anything, I would think the emphasis on cross-jurisdiction is a little bit higher in terms of maritime for automated technologies. Because if we look at drones, ultimately you have to deal with the drones within your airspace. You're not as concerned about drones that are flying cross jurisdictions, unless you're talking about the European Union, in which case there's, it's a union and it's already discussing within itself, whereas maritime law could get pretty contentious if we're talking between countries that are adversarial, but they've agreed to some form of free trade. So I think this will be a very, very interesting negotiation process over at least the next decade, because we're looking at the technology now and it could already do all these things, but it's easy to imagine a future where you would want the logistics to be handled by at least a single platform or something, or a single protocol, where even if it's crossing platforms or jurisdictions, we could kind of confirm that this minimum level of data about what the device or what the system is doing is intelligible. So if we do need to intercept for any reason, or somebody does need to take control of a rogue system for any reason, that these standards are established. So I think this is going to be a fun one to watch. Thank you for bringing it up. We're going to take a short break, actually, just to thank our sponsors. So we've been very fortunate on this podcast. We've been sponsored from the very start. Right now we are adding a new sponsor, that is Akin Gump, which is, we're going to have a representative from Akin Gump on the Full Tilt tomorrow, Jennifer Richter, who's been a great supporter and friend throughout my entire career in the drone industry. So excited to see her thoughts on leadership. We also have Promo Drone. I would like you to go back to the episode where we interviewed Jamar and the great work they're doing over there. And we also have Dragonfly, Cam Shell, another great episode of the Full Tilt. And we've had Elsight on the board for quite some time. Elsight has been a great supporter of all our podcasts, and actually, if you have the time, you should check out their podcast, which is done by their marketer, Ben Gross. So thank you to our sponsors for everything you do. Again, Just a reminder to hit like on the button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you're enjoying this episode. And please do ask questions. You could also go to fullcrew.io and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss an episode. We're going to be moving over to my article next. So, Einride brings its electric, digital, and autonomous shipping solutions to Germany. So they're going to be setting up facilities in Germany. I think this is interesting because, we were talking in the United States about what Elon Musk was trying to do with Tesla in terms of automated trucking and the considerations of what that will mean for jobs. And the truth of that was actually that there's such a trucker shortage that it won't mean much for years to come. But it's interesting to see Europe taking a stab at this, and the CEO decided to choose Germany because he said it was the seat of shipping. So now that we're on land talking about automated systems, the reason I wanted to bring this up because we've got great guests to talk about it, and I just want to see what are the regulatory and legal concerns, especially in a more complicated environment like the European Union versus the United States, where it's assumed you could ship from New York to Los Angeles and it's all going to be under the same federal law. So what's everybody's thoughts on this?
Hey, Mike, can I go first? Because I want to fill in some blanks here. I did,
Sure.
because I'm a nerd, I did a little extra research on this. So Einride is a Swedish company.
Yes.
And they've been in existence since 2016 and actually had some of these autonomous trucks, the first ever, on the road in Sweden. As you said, this article is about their expansion to Germany. But what it mentions in passing, and I dug a little bit deeper into, is they actually have driverless electric trucks operating on public roads in Texas. And they actually have a headquarters. They have a location in Austin, Texas. And fun fact, next week in Move America event, they're speaking. So I can't wait to meet these guys in person. So they announced this year in March at Southwest, SWSX.
South by Southwest.
Yeah. They announced that they had their first remote pod operator. Her name is Tiffany Heathcott. I love that for a whole host of reasons. Number one, she's a woman, and she's their first. And number two, to Anna's point, they're not calling her a master or a driver or, any of the normal terms that you would think of in the industry. They're literally calling her a remote pod operator. And the vision is that they're going to eventually have one-to-many, right? Like a person like Tiffany in a control center operating multiple autonomous trucks at one time on the roads. And by the way, other fun fact, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, which in the United States are the ones to give approvals, gave approval for Einride to do this in Texas. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there that they've already been in Sweden doing this. They're in Germany now, like expanding through Europe. And by the way, fun fact, they're driving around Texas. And to Sean's point, this thing is, if you look at this pod truck, number one, it's ginormous. Number two, it has no
technical term, ginormous.
Yeah, there's no place at all for a driver in it. There's no cab for a driver, period.
Yep. Not even as a safety backstop.
Nope. So I would love to hear either Anna or Sean's thoughts on this. It's so cool.
Well, since I'm in the great state of Texas, I'll say yes, we definitely have a lot going on in autonomous. They've been moving for a while. I think one of the first ones delivered some beer from one part of the state to the other. So I thought that was kind of fun. But the one thing we've seen about this that I thought was very interesting is that the use cases have grown very quickly, with, not just on public highways, but particularly in areas that can be controlled, like mining, ports, etc. Their adoption rate is scaling quickly, or within a plant or area that's covered, that you're not dealing with public traffic.
Yeah,
so I think it's interesting to see those controlled conditions. You're starting to see a lot of adoption. plus all the tests. I mean, there's now, hundreds of thousands of miles on the public highways that they're starting to run. So to me, it seems like this is moving as fast as any of the autonomous seem to be occurring. And I'm curious to see, it seems to be that automated trucking would happen faster than perhaps some of the automated transportation of humans, as far as taking people from point A to point B.
Right?
Yeah, it just seems like, and the economics are once again so much
bigger
faster
payout.
So I agree with your earlier point, Michael, that the dearth of truck drivers is giving an opening to this. But I do wonder, and I wonder this a lot as we look at robotics across the spectrum. In some cases, they're certainly replacing, dull, dirty, dangerous, and truck driving certainly might fill a couple of those areas. But there are an awful lot of truck drivers, and just looking at the United States, I don't know about the European Union where this story is based, but there's an awful lot of truck drivers. So depending on the speed of adoption, it'll be curious to see if the retirements and the lack of the younger generation entering the market equals out in any way to the adoption rate, to where there's not hundreds of thousands of people, because it's one of the ways people who don't necessarily have a higher education are able to make pretty decent pay.
Yeah.
And those middle
more than decent, hard work, but
disappearing. And so I am kind of curious, because this one affects an awful lot of the workforce.
Hey, Sean, I was just going to say, as I think about this and my little drive through Texas and Buc-ee's, right? The classic Buc-ee's, what happens to all those truck stops? When the truck doesn't need stop and there's no people on it. So I don't know. I don't know what the future of Buc-ee's will be when this thing really kicks off. But anyway, great jerky there.
Well, it's like all the empty retail storefronts that I see popping up, post-pandemic. The truth of the matter is, upcoming generations were going to adopt this technology and not take on that work at whatever rate they were going to do it at, but the need or the transfer of interest to these technologies happened rapidly under COVID. So it might even be that the study that I was quoting from 2 years ago about the trucker shortage is actually almost irrelevant based on the speed of adoption in kind of these controlled condition situations, because those weren't appraised in that report. This was literally talking for long distance shipping or truck driving. But we brought this up, and I try to push it on every podcast, because I think, since I work in the autonomous industry just as an advocate, that we don't talk enough about the reality that these are going to take away jobs. They're not going to be replaceable jobs for that generation. You might be able to train up new people to program robots or do maintenance for robots, but those will be new people. Those will not be people transferring their skills. So the thing for me is, we need to redefine work, value in your life based on how much you work. All of that is going to have to be considered, because the truth of the matter is, this dull, dirty, dangerous work should be absorbed by robots if we are going to create an environment for human flourishing. But that should not come at the consequence of people not being able to define success against each other in life for the work that they put into building themselves and creating value for the world. So,
many deep thoughts there, Mike. Blowing my mind. I would love to hear Anna's thoughts on that too.
Yeah, it seems that Germany is becoming a bit of a hub for autonomous driving or cars, because just recently Elon Musk, they opened a Tesla plant in Germany, and now I read this article, and it seems that German legislation is kind of advanced, because there's some similarities between law of the sea and traffic law, because in law of the sea you have the master, who is the responsible person, who is in charge, and when it comes to traffic law and also criminal law in relation to traffic offenses, you always have the driver, which is at the center of regulation, and here the same, you don't have a driver any longer. And in many European states, there are now at least projects to bring the law in line with these autonomous cars. And in many jurisdictions, you also have trials. And in Switzerland, for instance, there are driverless buses within cities, kind of shuttle buses, and quite successful trials. But I guess the traffic, like car traffic, is somehow comparable with maybe ports, because you have congested areas and complex situations. It's not comparable to the open seas, where you have not a lot of ships, and where you don't have some of the problems you would have in ports, or in traffic in cities, in urban area. Yeah, and then of course, I guess Europe is small, and the European countries are very small. If I take Switzerland, it's not even the size of Massachusetts, and each country has its own traffic laws, and the EU has some competencies, but not all. So it's also a huge, it's a very complex regulatory situation, and I'm not sure whether all countries are as advanced as Germany when it comes to regulation.
And they might not be as excited about it if it means, a dent in their workforce, and then therefore damaging to their economy. So that should be an interesting negotiation between European states. So we got a couple comments we got to catch up on. So Mason Jar M, maybe autonomous defense UAVs, drones protecting drones. He was talking specifically when we were in the maritime sector. Yep, that's going to be a thing. And Joel Mario Garza, the need is so that a large shipping company control the market and keep smaller companies from getting hold of this business. The need for regulation is to keep businesses from access to this business. So I think he's saying that the regulators are going to favor already established companies. Might be true, might be not. It depends, especially in the United States. Actually, there's been some pushback around larger companies and purchases, even such that what would be a somewhat innocuous purchase, like Adobe purchasing Figma, there's discussion that the regulators might go after them for antitrust. So I don't know, we'll see. I would say that in terms of automated shipping and what Anna just said, I think there's a lot to discuss. It's not going away, and this seems like the sort of thing that can explode overnight, right? Where, especially with the amount of pressures we have to kind of get the economy up and running, and the supply side, demand side shocks have not seemed to completely resolve themselves, people will be looking for any solution to smooth and iron out those kind of bumps in the road, right? So we're going to end today with a really, really good feel-good story that Dawn found. So, want to tell us about this article, Dawn?
Yeah, I was sitting there in the, I think it was like the Hampton Inn lobby last week when I was in the DC area. And, they always have the TV on during breakfast. And I saw like a little feature on this. So I did some research, found an article about it. Basically, it's about an U.S. Army veteran from Phoenix, a guy named Richie Meader. He's the first Arizona veteran to receive this robotic exoskeleton that is helping him walk. It is actually enabling him to walk almost like normal. You can see what it looks like there. He has some things that he has to use still with his hands. But this gentleman, first of all, thank him for his service. Has been wheelchair bound for over a decade since getting seriously injured during the Iraqi conflict. And, so this exoskeleton is made by a company called Rewalk, R-E-W-A-L-K. It's called the Personal 6.0 Exoskeleton. And these run about $75,000 a pop, roughly. And they were approved for commercial use in 2014. There's over 600 of them in use today. Really interesting. They are battery powered, a motorized system. So people with spinal cord injuries or other disabilities, enables them to walk because there's motors at the hips and at the knee joints that allow the legs to move when they basically move their torso in such a way that they tilt it in a certain way. It takes about 2.5 months to get trained on how to actually use it properly over 28 sessions. And, what's really cool is that the Department of Veterans Affairs actually has a national program, and that's how Richie was able to receive this particular sorry, of course my dog's in the background, like, having fun there. Not having fun, she had some surgery. So anyway, I just thought this was an amazing article, and that shows like how robotics is really changing people's lives at a real human level. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts.
I really like
Go ahead, Anna. Sorry.
Thank you. It's really interesting to see for how you can use exoskeletons and exosuits for rehabilitative purposes. And in Europe, I mainly know them from industrial uses where, in the automotive industry, for instance, they would use it that workers could more easily move things. You can lift more weight, you can have more endurance, etc. But again, here there's also potential for misuse because, of course, it enhances your bodily skills. And I read an interesting article a while ago about enhanced burglary techniques using exoskeletons or exosuits because you can more easily climb or lift things. And an interesting aspect was that for the time being, it's still something which is very costly, not affordable for many. It's difficult to access, but that's certainly going to change at some point. And again, we have not only to have the beneficial uses on our radar, but also potential misuses. And I guess the big challenge is really how you can use regulation to constrain the bad without really frustrating the good, because the example chosen is telling. I mean, it gives a person new life and new possibilities, but at the same time, as every technology, the potential for misuse is there, and criminals are usually very quick in adopting new technologies, often much faster than enforcers. If I think of cyber technology, for instance,
usually.
yet first cyber crimes and then police using cyber means to investigate crime or to prevent crime. So just a thought from a more security oriented person.
Yeah, the street finds a way to use things that are outside of the inventor's intent, as we've seen with basically every technology. Dawn, you're muted.
I see that. I thought I was a glass half empty kind of gal, but it just got me beat.
I appreciate it, though.
I'm like, this is such a happy story. She's like, could you imagine like the criminals using it? No, but it's like, seriously, do you remember the movie Avatar, the first one? I know they're having a C1 out, Anna, right? Under C1, but it was like the army, the guys that were using the giant exoskeletons to kill the blue people, and like pillage the planet. So yeah, there's always going to be a negative side to technology. I just love this story, though.
Well, yeah, it's creating strength where there isn't, right? So any kind of use of strength, good and bad, these things will be used for. The technology is necessarily neutral. Sean, you got a comment?
Yeah, for industrial, we see it a lot where they've started the adoption to prevent injury. Because like you say, the strength basically, like if you're doing a automotive manufacturing line and all of your work is overhead, you're constantly doing something along those lines. So that's where I see a lot of advantages to this, that immediately it supports, it makes it less, chance of an injury. So I think that's a big move there. The other thing I think is it makes it
Oh, Sean, looks like we lost you for a second.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it also makes it where people are able to, I think, utilize something like this in a way that allows them not just to prevent injury, but allows them to do better work. So they're more efficient. They're able to do things without. I guess cobotics is the way I look at it, is collaborative robotics, and the fact that in this case, the human's not being taken out of the equation, it's enhancing what they're able to do. But I think it's a great story in the rehabilitation space. It's fantastic to hear that it's starting to be adopted. I mean, to hear there's hundreds of units even in that capacity is great to hear about. But I like the idea that it allows humans potentially to continue to do the work at a safer and enhanced way, and then help people rehabilitate who've had injuries. It's just a great story.
Yeah, I think this is actually the most undersold kind of sector or niche in robotics. I think people really, for whatever reason, haven't grasped onto the absolute potential of this. Because, all right, let's take your cobotics example. If you've seen even uses of exoskeletons that aren't like full body exoskeleton, they're just a back brace type of thing that allows somebody to hold a riveter that's much heavier than what a normal human capacity is. And so now we've created a situation or a scenario where a human has the flexibility because our machine that was evolved over years is highly flexible and has a lot of dexterity, but we may not have the strength to complete a task. Now you're combining the two, and you could also increase accuracy for the human, right? So kind of all types of lock-on systems and things like that. So there's that, and then there's also this amazing kind of humanitarian use case, because if we look what's going on, let's say Ukraine, Afghanistan, Syria, conflict zones throughout the world, people are maimed, injured, and made disabled. And then there are people that are born that way here and abroad. And to give these people access to a life that is more average, right, in terms of capability, it allows them to take their brain and use it in the world in a way that they would not have been able to less than a decade ago. And $75,000 might seem expensive now, but what happens when that's $25,000 and it could easily be covered by generic insurance? What happens when it's $5,000 and hey, I want to be able to do this task, or I want to do some work on my house. I'll, rather than hire somebody, I'm just gonna buy the exoskeleton. I think this fundamentally changes humans, their abilities in the world. Maybe we could compete with the robots finally. We just had to join them.
I will say, because we have the leadership podcast too, Full Tilt, I love what Mr. Meader said at the end of the article, and he said, quote, "What I found out through all of it was the biggest disability is not my inability to walk, but it was the way I was looking at things. It was the mental side of it."
Yeah.
And I just thought that was just a beautiful quote, because, it doesn't really matter what your circumstances are. It's how you view the world. And I love that this now enables him physically to do things he wasn't able to do before. But I also love the fact that early into this process of being wheelchair bound and having lost the use of his legs, that he realized, it's how I look at the world. It's not about whether I actually can walk or not. So I think that's a great way to kind of end the show, because it's a great segue to our leadership stuff also. But I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful quote.
Yeah, absolutely, Dawn. I totally agree. There's a lot that's inspiring about this story, and I definitely commend our audience to go and find it and read it, because it'll make you feel good about technology, which, as we've seen over the course of this episode, sometimes there's reasons not to feel so good about it. But ultimately, this is what causes progress. So thank you everybody for joining us today. I would like to thank our guests Sean Guerre and Dr. Anna Petrig for joining us and giving us these great articles to discuss. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up on the crew this week. So, and then also Dawn of Drones. Dawn, you want to tell us what's coming up on the calendar?
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of leadership, tomorrow we have our Full Tilt Tech Industry Leadership Talks podcast with Jennifer Richter of Aiken Gump. She leads their emerging technologies practice, and she's going to be talking about the theme of leading technology work by embracing and coaching curiosity. So check that out, 9 a.m. Mountain tomorrow on the full crew. On the Dawn of Drones Wednesday, we have Tawny Smith, who we're continuing an incredible month dedicated to market use cases. And Tawny is going to be talking about a number of market use cases with drones, including drone as first responder, which she does with the Flying Lions Incorporated group. And then this Thursday on Clubhouse, we have Defend Solutions, Gabriel Monheim, and he's going to be talking about counter UAS. We always think about market use cases, but none of them can thrive because, as Anna noted, there are bad guys out there that are going to abuse the technology. So how do we protect the good guys? And that's what Defend Solutions is all about. Next week on the full crew, same time, same place, we've got Randy Goers, the podcaster from the Drone Radio Show, and Henze Gustav from Drone Cadets on the show, on the full crew. And then we migrate over to Twitter Spaces on Tuesday with Andreas Ployer from Austria. He has a company called Drone Rescue Systems, a parachute company. So check that out. When we talk about safety, that's what they're doing. And then, of course, the incredible Sharon Rossmark of Women in Drones. Sharon and I will be live from Move America in Austin, Texas next week. So hope you can join us at all of our shows as we progress through.
All right. So again, I just want to remind people to subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the like, hit the notification bell. The channel has been growing off the wall. We're so excited about what's going on. When we went into this venture 3 months ago, we had our hopes and we are meeting them. So that's all because of you, the audience. Again, thank you to our guests for joining us, and we'll see you in the rest of the week. So we're out here.